Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of RPGs with Paddy. I'm Paddy. So, today we're going to be looking at another Cthulhu by Gaslight scenario from Sacraments of Evil. It's called The Masterwork of Nicholas Forby. This scenario was written by Penelope Love, who you may know from a variety of other excellent scenarios and supplements written for Call of Cthulhu. She also has a nice story in the creepy collection, The Sisterhood, Dark Tales, and Secret Histories. I bring this up because she is also at the helm of the upcoming campaign for 7th edition, Cthulhu by Gaslight, which will be called The Curse of Seven. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing that campaign for Cthulhu by Gaslight. But now let's get back to today's scenario. So investigators are called out to the manor of their old school friend, Harry Forby, who has taken ill again. He wants their help in uncovering the old family fortune. That's about all I can tell you without getting into spoilers. So if you're a player, you should probably stop watching now. But if you're a keeper or thinking you might run this game in the future, let's get into it. Okay, so this is an interesting scenario, definitely, with some good points. But in my opinion, the layout is really bad, really messy. There is some important information for the keeper, which is not explained until the very last page. And there's other information where it should be kind of given to the keeper in advance, but it ends up being given kind of pieced out throughout the whole scenario. So it's difficult as a keeper as you're reading this through. While a lot of Call of Cthulhu scenarios can definitely benefit from reading through the scenario twice, I think that this scenario, the way it's laid out, actually requires the keeper to read it twice to understand what's going on, really. So I'm going to gather all of the information the keeper should have first, and then go through how the scenario will likely play out. On the other hand, don't be put off by this. There are some good points. For example, this is a rare non mythos game. There is a supernatural element, but it's not mythos related. However, the scenario also plays up a completely non supernatural explanation to kind of let investigators drop their guard, and then you can bring in the supernatural element as well. Okay, so the history is maybe a little bit complicated, but you don't need to know it all, so I'll blast through this a little bit quickly. There are four generations of Forby that you should know about, although the youngest is not really mentioned too much in the events of the scenario, so don't worry too much about that. So the oldest generation of the Forbys is Nicholas Forby. He was a sculptor who mostly worked with metals, and working with metals gave him some lead poisoning, and he was regularly ill. He worked with a fellow artist, Christopher Lehman, and Nicholas found out that his wife was cheating on him with Christopher, and he decided, I need to kill Christopher. He even suspected that Nicholas's own son, Alistair, was actually Christopher's son, not his. It's not 100% explained how it was done, but Nicholas does manage to kill Christopher by casting him in bronze. He used a new method for casting bronze, but he's so mad at the idea that Alistair is not his son that he doesn't want to pass down this secret to the family. So he actually writes the formula and hides it inside a bronze egg. So it's written in paper and then it's hidden inside a bronze egg. And then that bronze egg is hidden inside the chest of the casting of bronze. He names the statue Icarus, after the famous Icarus who flew too close to the sun. I'm not entirely sure why this was chosen, especially given all of the infidelity in Greek mythology. But I guess there's a link between Icarus was the son of Daedalus, master craftsman. So maybe he's thinking of himself as a master craftsman. But if that's the case, then maybe he should have cast his son in bronze and called him Icarus. Anyway, don't worry about that. So in this case, don't read too much into the Greek mythology, but later you will have to kind of read quite deeply into it to get the hint. Anyway, but apparently the hiding of this secret egg, so when he wanted to hide the secret of bronze casting in the egg and then put it in the chest, apparently he actually did that much later than when he cast his friend in bronze. So I'm not sure exactly like how he kind of opened up the bronze statue and put that in the chest. Again, don't worry about it too much. You don't need to know that, actually. So Alistair kind of grew up in the shadow of his father, who was now kind of suffering a lot from the lead poisoning. So Nicholas would always taunt his son Alistair about the lost family secret, the family fortune that he would never inherit. Something that Nicholas said, some kind of request for death or a request to see his friend again, woke up the statue, and then that started the family curse. So this Christopher / Icarus statue came to life and killed Nicholas by choking him to death or breaking his neck. After Nicholas died, Alistair grew up and got married, but he was also sick. This is kind of unspecified what kind of sickness, but Alistair was consumed by wanting to find the family secret and the fortune, and maybe this obsession led to his wife cheating on him. Not physically, it says. I don't think it's so important whether that's real cheat, like physical cheating or not. The only thing that it proves is that Alistair's son, Harry, is indeed Alistair's son and not another man's son. But anyway, yes, his wife had this emotional affair with Alistair's doctor. Alistair was sick, so the doctor was there often, and the doctor and his wife kind of had an emotional affair. Not super important. Alistair, however, did eventually find out the secrets of Icarus, and the statue came to life and starts coming for him. But Alistair decides to shoot himself before the statue gets to him. It seems that when a Forby is asking for death, or when someone is uncovering the secrets within the statue, that's when the statue will wake up and it will come to kill one of the Forbys. That is the family curse, although no one alive is aware of it. Now, Alistair's son Harry discovers his father with his brains blown out all over the library, and he falls ill from this whole ordeal, this very traumatic ordeal, because he's a young boy at the time. But in the back of his mind, he has this kind of vague memory of some horrible green man. The green man was, of course, the statue Icarus, because as bronze turns green when it's outside due to oxidation, and this scenario taught me a new word as well. I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce it, but verdigris, I presume it comes from the French. That's the process of bronze turning green from oxidation. So the green man is the statue of Icarus, but it might also be useful for the keeper, I think it is, for the keeper to be aware of the English folklore of the green man. Maybe not the kind of green man that appears in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Now, closer to the scenario start. Harry, who just found his father with his brains blown out, he was a school friend of one or more of the investigators. But now that they're more grown up, he is very eager to find the family's secret treasure. He is still physically frail as an adult after all of his childhood sicknesses, so he wants the investigators to investigate and find this secret family fortune. Now, briefly, I'll just mention the fourth generation. So Harry's son is George Forby, and he will appear a little bit in the scenario, but it's not really important. But I will add in something else you can try for him at the climax of the scenario. So Harry is married to a woman called Gertrude, and it's actually Gertrude who sent the message to invite you to the manor. She hasn't cheated on her husband yet, but she will start to develop an interest in one of the investigators when they come to the house. Her brother, John Medler, an ex-military man, is also living at the Forby estate. He wants to kind of do away with Harry and inherit, through his sister, the Forby fortune, or at least the estate. When he found out about the Green Man incident that Harry had when he was a child, he decided to make a costume and go around the outside of the house scaring Harry, hoping to weaken him and lead him to a death from fright. Okay, so that's all the background information. Now you know everything you need to. With that out of the way, the rest of it is actually quite simple for the keeper, although there's a few kind of confusing parts. But the scenario is basically split out over 3 to 4 days and the same number of nights. There, in the scenario, there are individual sections splitting out each location. So you can do things out of order, but the procedure that the scenario predicts is what follows. But know that it's a little bit more flexible than that. So you arrive at the estate and you meet Gertrude, who asks you to put aside any guns or to keep them hidden because her husband has a big fear of guns after his father shot himself and he found that. But then you'll go into the house and you'll have a catch-up with Harry, your old school friend, who has taken ill again, like he's become more ill. You'll also meet Gertrude's brother, John Medler. And through this talking, Harry sometimes is a little bit rambling and a little bit incoherent at times. But the key point is, after kind of reminiscing, he will say that he really wants to find the family fortune. He thinks it's an emerald the size of a hen's egg, based on a portrait in the library, which you can go and see later. During all this conversation, Medler will also bring up talk of a ghost, which leads to the description of the Green Man. After this, presuming the investigators accept the bill to go and try to find the fortune. So after this, Medler will show them around the grounds, and he will try to suss them out, and not particularly subtly either, and just kind of find if they are a bit of a threat to his plans. As you're going around, you will meet, so a little bit outside, you will meet 2 of the dogs and their owner, Old Fred. Old Fred is kind of a handyman that just does stuff around the house and around the gardens. He's also involved in some illegal poaching around here, so he will act suspiciously throughout the scenario and he will complicate things a little bit. Feel free to kind of add in extra things there as well. After this, Medler will make an excuse that he has to go to London for urgent business. He goes about halfway towards the village before sneakily turning back and going towards the quarry, which is where he keeps his Green Man costume. He's planning on appearing again tonight to scare Harry. But as far as the investigators are concerned, it's about time for dinner. After dinner, the investigators it's getting kind of dark, so you probably don't want to do too much outside, but you can have a quick look at the library and just get a vague layout about the kind of order that's going on here, but not actually do any library searches. At some point during the day, you will run into Harry and Gertrude's son, George. He loves reading and he knows about a secret passage. It's not super important. But he's not supposed to read scary books, but he sometimes does so in secret. The investigators can get him to warm up to them, and he might show them the secret passage. So, as night starts to fall, Harry gets into an argument with his wife Gertrude. Harry really wants to lock all of the windows and doors around the house, and he feels that Gertrude, while she's humouring him and she's going to do it, he feels she's taking it a bit too lightly, and he considers this a big security issue. Later in the night, from bed probably, a listen roll from the investigators will reveal the sound of movement outside the house. A further natural world roll will notice that the dogs didn't give any kind of warning. The roll doesn't tell you this, but this also does imply that the dogs might know the intruder. But don't spell that out for the investigators. If they get it themselves, that's good. If the investigators do start moving around, that's what's going to start the dogs barking now. In this confusion, with the dogs suddenly barking, lights are turning on, people are waking up, the investigators will be able to see a dark figure, a large dark figure, but with all of the confusion, it manages to escape around the side of the house and then off into the dark. But you can't find anything now in the dark, but you can find some green smudges on the house that seem to be a combination of things like grass and moss. The next morning, you can try a few track rolls. The first successful one, finds that the trail seems to be deliberately misleading and confusing, trying to make it hard to track. If you make multiple successful track rolls, I think it might be 3, you can find that the tracks eventually do lead to the quarry. So this day, you can do whatever you want, but it would probably involve inspecting the grounds, researching the library, going to the quarry, or possibly going to the town to talk to people. These could happen at any point. It could be today or it could be one of the other days, but I'll just kind of give a brief breakdown here. The library is one of the main sources of information, and there's some key points here as well. There is a portrait of Nicholas and his family, and he seems to be holding something green, but it's a little bit difficult to see what it is. This is probably where the rumor of the emerald started. From here, you can also look out into the garden, and you can see where the statues are. You can find and read the journals of Nicholas and Alistair, which go into some of the background of all of the history I talked about earlier. It's described in more detail here in the book, but I won't go into all of it here. It's just, there's no flaming gun or anything like that. It's just kind of giving you a little bit of flavor of the background. Now, from Nicholas's journal, there is a large chunk missing. I think approximately like 6 months of it is missing. But we'll get to that later. But if you go down to the very last page, this is the last day that Nicholas was alive, but the handwriting actually seems to be of someone else. You can find out that it was Nicholas's butler. And it reads, "Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me?" Going by the scenario, there's no role to recognize this now, but a longer version of this quote can be found on the Icarus statue in the garden. Then, at that point, per the scenario, it can be identified as from Milton's Paradise Lost. But I don't think that's actually relevant. It's just showing that there's a link between Nicholas's last day and the Icarus statue. Just kind of trying to make that link. So the missing section of Nicholas's journey can be found in the priest's hole. A priest hole is a small space hidden in a house that used to be used to hide a priest from the time when being a Catholic was illegal. So people would come and inspect the house looking for Catholics, especially Catholic priests, and they would have to hide in a small hidden compartment in the house. So nobody alive knows about this priest hole, and the scenario doesn't give you any role to find it. So figure out if you want your players to get it or not. It's absolutely not vital, but it talks about Nicholas's suspicions about his wife cheating with his friend and how he spied on them through the secret passage. There are small kind of notes in the margin that also suggests that Alistair found this missing part of the journal and notices that the infidelity or the suspicion of infidelity started 9 months before his own birth. So he's starting to think, maybe Nicholas isn't my father. The final part of this section is the supposedly important part, which makes reference to Perseus of Greek mythology. A series of roles, like way too many, can lead you to understand that you should use a mirror to angle the light from the fireplace, which will bounce out the window and land on Icarus. And this is the map to the treasure. This is, like I said before, I do like the idea of. Have I said this before? Maybe. But I do like the idea of using Greek mythology and using that as a puzzle and those secret hidden meanings. But I think this is a really, really vague clue. And it's hidden behind so many difficult roles. So I found it actually quite obscure, even once I knew the answer as well. And maybe other people would prefer it, but I found it kind of distracting and confusing more than anything. Anyway, if you want to check out the grounds, there are a lot of statues there. The one of Icarus is the best preserved. It looks pretty much fine, apart from having turned green, which is what happens to bronze when it's exposed to oxygen. But the other statues, they're all of kind of classic mythology, although some of them were a bit obscure I didn't recognize. Those ones are in much worse condition. This kind of implies that Icarus is special. So it's kind of starting to draw the investigator's idea towards Icarus. But the scenario explains that Icarus is more sheltered, and that's why it's better preserved. I would probably leave that last part out, because there's something strange about Icarus. It's more well preserved, and then you're like, oh no, it's just more sheltered. The Icarus statue itself shows a man without wings, so presumably in the middle of a fall, who seems to be falling, and so it's kind of more of a horizontal position, or at least that's how I read it. Then there is a quote from John Milton's epic poem, Paradise Lost. So it's a little bit longer. It's 3 lines of the poem rather than just the 1 line that's up there. But again, I don't think that that's a real big hint. It's just the connection between his last day and the statue. So in the grounds, there's also a mausoleum which holds the sarcophagus of Nicholas Forby. You can get the key and then you can go in, but you'll need to make a strength roll to open the sarcophagus if that's what you want to do. Then you'll need another very specific set of rolls. Medicine will identify the broken neck of the skeleton. A spot hidden will see tiny flecks of green around the neck. And then a chemistry roll will identify these tiny flecks as bronze. But again, really multiple difficult rolls to kind of get that information. So maybe try and, simplify it. There are some other non-important things in the grounds, like an ornamental lake and an ice house. The ice house will come up later, probably. You could also go to the abandoned quarry, which is a little bit further away, but you will be warned against it as it's very dangerous. Meddler in particular doesn't want anyone to go there, because they may find his green man costume, which he keeps in an abandoned hut out by the quarry. If you decide to go into town, you can find some small rumors there, but nothing of too much interest. They give you enough information that if the investigators choose to go there, you could roleplay that, but there's nothing really important there. So your investigators will probably do some of these things now, and maybe they'll do some of the other things on other days. So split it up however it suits your group. Oh, and in this second day, Meddler should come back from his trip to London sometime early or in the middle of this day. So, on the second night, Harry again insists the place is locked up well. There's no fight this time because I presume everyone's on the same page. It's like, there was an attack last night. But here's where it gets a little bit complicated on the second night. Meddler's actions depend on what the investigators are going to do. If the investigators have planned an ambush trying to capture this green man, then Meddler will try and mess it up. And they give an example here. For example, he suddenly claims to see a shape in the darkness and he goes running after it, leading the investigators on a wild chase around before he claims, I lost the track. If the investigators then keep looking in the dark, he'll sneak back to the house and throw pig's blood and brains in the library, mimicking Alistair's suicide. This will push Harry over the edge and he'll be almost catatonic for the rest of the scenario. If the investigators didn't plan an ambush, then Meddler will sneak away and he will get his costume and have a very similar interaction to the previous night. But this time it's recommended that you let the investigators get a good look at the Green Man mask, but that Meddler should still get away. Okay, so the scenario assumes that the investigators should be very close to solving everything by now. I'm not sure about that. Tracking in the morning is hard as there are a number of other tracks, and this may also lead to uncovering old Fred's poaching habits. There are also a few clearer tracks in the mud by the flower bed, but these tracks don't match old Fred's boots, and actually they don't match anyone's in the house. Although the scenario says that you might note that Meddler's boots are pristinely polished, as always, because he's an ex-military man. But I think this is kind of almost a waste of time, because if they were his boots, it doesn't matter if they were clean or not, the boot imprint should match. So I think nice idea, but again, not fully thought out, in my opinion. Maybe I'm missing something. So during this day, anyway, one of the staff members, Connie, leaves to go look after her infant, just across the way, like not within the grounds of the estate. There are a few other staff members who I haven't mentioned because they're not particularly important. But so during the day as well, Gertrude will start kind of more actively hitting on one of the investigators, and Harry will be watching this from his window, and then he'll come down if he's in a state to do so, and he'll start another fight with her because obviously his family history of infidelity is not good. Meddler, her brother, gets annoyed with Harry, and then he storms off to calm down. He does come back a few hours later. However, by dusk, Connie, one of the staff members who went off, has not returned. So a search around will find her kind of close to the quarry and lying down unconscious. Upon waking, she said that she saw a weird green man doing some sort of strange ritual, dance, or celebration. This was Meddler, and this is a little bit strange, which I'll explain just in the next section. So on the third night, Meddler decides that he wants to up the pressure now and try to finish Harry off. He plans to sneak into Harry's bedroom in costume and scare him to death. On his way to get the costume, he accidentally stumbles across old Fred out poaching. Meddler gets nervous and actually clubs old Fred to death. The dogs, who presumably weren't actually at the scene, that maybe they were off doing the poaching, they came back, they found the dead body. They start coming to the house and they're barking at the house, trying to lead people to their master's dead body. And Meddler seems to decide to delay his scare for tonight. So, the scare doesn't happen tonight, just the killing of old Fred. So the strange thing that I mentioned is Meddler, after his fight with Harry, went off to the quarry dressed up in his Green Man costume and starts dancing in the wood like that, so much so that it causes Connie to faint. Then he puts his costume back in his hut, goes back to the estate, and then plans on going back, getting the costume, coming back and sneaking into the house again. it just seems a little bit strange and overly complicated. I think that the addition of Connie's incident here doesn't make sense if you think about it too much. I think adding it in adds in a little scare factor, but it doesn't make sense once you know all of it and you're looking back at it. So on this day, nothing specific happens, just a continuation of the investigation. Maybe at this stage, your scenario playthrough will already be finished, depending on the actions of your investigators. So on the final night, Meddler sneaks in, or at least tries to, sneaks into Harry's bedroom and tries to scare him to death unless the investigators can stop it. And that's generally how things will go, unless the investigators have some action that kind of changes up the scene here. It is probably likely enough not to get quite up to night 4, because the actual finale of this scenario is triggered by one of two things. If someone finds where the treasure is, so remember it's inside the chest of Icarus, or if Harry calls for death, so if he thinks he's being attacked by the Green Man and he calls out for death, either of those things would awaken the Icarus statue, and then they will move and start going to try and kill Harry. So how can you stop it? If you can attack it, definitely, and if you manage to do 10 hit points of damage in a single hit, the bronze will crack, which exposes two things. First, it exposes the bones underneath, saying that actually there was a real person in here that was cast alive. But the second thing is that you will find maybe the bronze egg, which includes the secret, coming out. However, doing damage to the statue is difficult because it has 6 points of armor and 36 hit points. Now, if it gets cold, the metal alloy becomes brittle and then inflexible. At this stage, it can't move and the armor is negated because it's so brittle. So the idea of cooling the metal so that it's more brittle, that's how it's presented in the stats at the end of the scenario, like just in the appendix. But in the main text of the scenario, it says that you can take inspiration from Icarus and know that it was the water that killed him, so maybe water will stop the statue. And so this idea would leave you with 3 options. The ice house, which I think is a little bit strange, because it's ice, it's not water. There is an ornamental lake on the estate grounds, and then there's the big water reservoir at the quarry. So if you can lead the statue to one of those places, maybe you will have a chance. The ice house will work perfectly because cold is great. The ornamental lake, however, is too shallow and it won't stop it. The water at the quarry, however, would be enough to cool it down and render it brittle and unmovable. Now, another kind of weak point here I just want to point out, I think this is very strange because Icarus famously flew towards the sun with wax wings and thus they melted, leading to his death. So I think players and myself, if we were going down that line of thinking, what could kill Icarus? I think we would sooner think of fire and heat, not cold and ice. Now, as a statue, it can be melted down, but the bronze casting station that used to be here, the furnace that used to be here, that's all been sealed up completely. So unless you have another source of immense heat, that's not going to work. And actually, if you do melt it, you will also lose the family fortune secret because that's in a bronze container, which will also melt, and then it's just paper. To avoid getting stuck here, you might have some hint about the negative effect of cold on bronze at some point during the scenario. So, for example, you could have someone explain the old problems that they had with casting bronze, that it cracks and gets very brittle in the cold, and that's why a lot of the statues here have been badly weathered. But that the Icarus one had a new casting um, thing that was so beautiful and elegant that they wanted to kind of protect it so that it didn't degrade quite as much as the other statues. Alternatively, it could have been mentioned as one of the problems of bronze sculpture in one of the journals. Just something to kind of give them a hint to lead them towards that, if that's the way that you want to go. So basically, that's the end of the scenario. If they manage to get the secret formula, then the Forby family will be rich due to the many applications of this new process. Investigators could possibly negotiate for a percentage of that new fortune as well, or just a reward. Now, what do I think of this scenario? You may have noticed, maybe not so positive. I do think that it has a lot of potential, but it's a bit all over the place as well. The layout in the book is much more confusing than I've presented here. Well, at least I hope that I've managed to make it a little bit more clear and straightforward. But there's a lot of clues, maybe not key clues, but clues nonetheless, that are hidden behind about like four different checks. And that's pretty rough. A lot of the scenario might not play out much unless you make sure that Meddler gets away the first two nights. And that could be tough if the investigators are smart. You just kind of have to hand wave that, he gets away. Then it seems like everything is focusing on this green man. But then out of almost nowhere, it's actually the bronze statue is the real threat. It can really come out of left field if the investigators focus on the seemingly imminent threat of the green man rather than the obscure family history. This can be good, it really depends on your group, because it lulls the players into a false sense of security and then bam, the supernatural hits. But it also seems a little bit clumsy in my mind. It would almost seem like the secret casting method involves sacrificing someone, and that's why it produces such great results, but that it also curses your family. But really, it's just a good casting method, and the curse is kind of almost unrelated and a little bit random. Like, I know they're connected, but yeah. There are also, as I mentioned before, several references to Greek mythology and classical literature. I like this definitely. But from my knowledge, and maybe admittedly a little bit limited, my limited knowledge on the subject, even with the hints that are given in the scenario, would not have led me along the same line of thinking. Maybe the writer, Penelope Love, is very well versed in all of this, and the ideas make more sense to her, but I think that it's just going to be confusing to the average player. I'll just repeat there that I actually do like a lot of Penelope's other works, but I think this one was not quite there. Kind of a good overall idea, but just the execution was a little bit lacking. If you're running this scenario, and it wouldn't be top of my recommended list for Gaslight scenarios, I think there are a few things that I would add in. The first is that you do a bit of research about the mythological Green Man. For example, it's widely envisioned as a pagan symbol. And maybe add in something about the family's strong links to Christianity. In the scenario, they don't have that, you would have to add it in. But maybe that's why they have a priest's hole in the house, because they've always been very religious. And maybe all of the men in the family, as they become more ill, or maybe as they see their wives becoming more unfaithful, they turn to religion. The green man, again, the pagan symbol, wants to be honored and wants to kind of take back this land or something like that. Yeah, and of course, that's not what's really happening, but that's how the people here might rationalize the attacks of the Green Man. Just an idea. Another thing is if the investigators find out about the statue, they might rush to Harry's bedroom and they might come across Meddler in the act, and they might find out that Harry is already dead. This may almost seem like an anticlimactic ending, but then you could have one of the investigators realize that if Harry is already dead, maybe the statue is going to be looking for another Forby sacrifice. So then you have to run and try to find and save little George. And extra points here if one of the investigators has already made a strong connection with the boy. Okay, so that's going to do it for this review. It's a nice idea of a scenario, and if you don't think about it too much, it's quite good. Or if you think about it so much that you come up with kind of a better framing or better explanation for all of this, then it would work too. So either think too much or not enough. Don't think in the middle. That's my sage advice. Okay, so that is going to do it for today. If you've got anything from the video, drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And the next video in the series is going to be Plant-y Dire. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. That is Welsh for Children of the Earth. So, I'll see you next time, everyone. Bye.